There's a particular kind of person who walks into a room full of their peers and feels like they've time traveled from a different decade. 25 years old, sitting at a birthday party watching everyone take shots while mentally calculating hangover recovery times and tomorrow's productivity loss. Not judging, just existing on a different frequency entirely. Psychologists have been studying this phenomenon for decades, and what they've discovered is far stranger than anyone expected. Because feeling older than one's chronological age isn't just a personality quirk or a phase people go through. It's a complete rewiring of how the brain processes reality itself. And the implications? They touch everything from social behavior to physical health to lifespan. But here's the part that most people miss. The concept starts with something called subjective age, essentially the age someone feels internally versus what their birth certificate says. Most people assume this is random, maybe tied to energy levels or lifestyle choices. It's not random at all. Research from the Journal of Gerontology tracked thousands of individuals across different age groups and found a consistent pattern. Some people feel younger than they are, the eternal optimists, the adventure seekers. But then there's this other group, and they're fascinating because they defy what society expects. These individuals, often in their 20s and 30s, describe themselves as serious, thoughtful, mature beyond their years. When researchers dig deeper, they find these aren't just self-perceptions. These people score significantly higher in conscientiousness. They engage in more reflective thinking. They plan obsessively for the future. But there's a trade-off embedded in the data that nobody talks about. The same study showed these individuals struggle with social engagement compared to their peers, not because they lack social skills, but because their internal world operates at a completely different tempo than the people around them. Picture someone at 30 who spends weekends volunteering or studying complex topics, while their friends prioritize parties and casual socializing. The gap isn't just behavioral, it's perceptual. They're measuring themselves against their chronological cohort and finding a chasm. Social psychologists call this temporal self-comparison, and it creates a feedback loop that's hard to escape. So where does the split come from? Why do some brains decide to age faster than the body they inhabit? The answer usually lies somewhere in childhood, though not always in obvious ways. When researchers interview people who feel significantly older than their age, a pattern emerges in their histories. Early exposure to adult responsibilities, financial hardship that forced strategic thinking before adolescence, family instability that required emotional regulation most adults haven't mastered, sometimes trauma, the kind that compresses years of psychological development into months. Developmental psychologists had documented this process extensively. A child who manages household bills at 10 isn't just learning arithmetic, they're learning risk assessment, resource allocation, consequence prediction. Their brain sees environmental danger and makes a calculation. Survival requires accelerated maturity. This is what researchers call role acceleration, though that clinical term doesn't quite capture what's actually happening. It's more like the brain deciding that childhood is a luxury it can't afford, so it skips ahead in the development timeline. And here's where it gets particularly interesting. This isn't a conscious choice. Nobody wakes up and decides to feel 40 at 25. The adaptation happens at a level below conscious awareness, rewiring neural patterns around responsibility, caution, and long-term thinking. Studies confirm that early exposure to adult-like responsibilities creates lasting changes in cognitive and emotional processing. The brain develops what some psychologists call survivor consciousness, heightened sensitivity to risk, an instinct for pattern recognition in social dynamics, a default setting of caution rather than optimism. These aren't character flaws, they're survival adaptations that happen to have social consequences nobody warned anyone about. But the story doesn't end with childhood experiences because personality itself plays a massive role in who ends up feeling older, almost like psychological accelerants. Certain personality traits seem to fast-track the subjective aging process, almost like psychological accelerants. High conscientiousness, for instance, correlates strongly with feeling older. These are people who naturally gravitate toward discipline, organization, long-term planning. They experience the weight of responsibility differently than others, not as an occasional burden, but as a constant presence. Every decision carries the shadow of future consequences. Then there's introversion, or more specifically, low extroversion. People who naturally turn inward, who process life through reflection rather than action, tend to feel older because they're thinking about life at a level of complexity most people actively avoid. Deep thinking has a peculiar side effect. It ages a person psychologically. Contemplating mortality, impermanence, the passage of time, these aren't casual thoughts. They're the kind of existential awareness usually associated with much later life stages. And neuroticism, the tendency toward anxiety, worry, rumination, act like a multiplier. When someone's default mental state involves running worst-case scenarios, anticipating problems, preparing for catastrophe, their brain is essentially doing the emotional labor of someone decades older. Cognitive psychologists have identified this pattern as anticipatory thinking, and it's exhausting in ways that are hard to articulate. While peers are making spontaneous plans, these individuals are already 3 steps ahead, mapping out potential failures, considering backup plans, calculating risk ratios. At a dinner party, someone mentions a spontaneous road trip. Most people get excited, but there's always that one person whose brain immediately jumps to tire pressure, emergency funds, health insurance coverage. What happens if someone gets injured in a remote location? That's not pessimism. It's a cognitive style that processes information the way someone much older would, with caution born from understanding that actions have consequences that ripple forward in time. And the fascinating part is research shows this cognitive style actually enhances problem solving and foresight. These individuals often become exceptional in workplace settings, demonstrating reliability and strategic thinking beyond their years. But there's a cost that becomes clearer when examining the social dimension. Social psychology reveals something uncomfortable about how subjective age shapes relationships and belonging. When someone's internal sense of self doesn't align with peer norms, they experience what researchers call social dissonance. It's not just feeling different, it's operating in a completely different reality while physically occupying the same space as peers. These individuals often gravitate toward older social circles, seeking intellectual engagement and depth of conversation that feels absent among chronological peers, or they withdraw entirely, finding solitary activities more fulfilling than superficial social interaction. The challenge isn't a lack of social capability, it's misalignment. Imagine being at a gathering where everyone's discussing trending topics, celebrity gossip, viral content. The brain categorizes this information as trivial and literally struggles to engage. Not from judgment, but from a fundamental mismatch in what constitutes meaningful interaction. From the outside, it looks like aloofness or superiority. From the inside, it's exhaustion from pretending to care about things that feel deeply unimportant when measured against larger concerns: legacy, purpose, mortality, impact. And this is where cultural context becomes crucial, because not all societies view this the same way. In cultures that worship youthfulness, endless fun, deferred responsibility, living for the moment, feeling older becomes a source of alienation. There's a sense of being fundamentally out of step with cultural expectations. But in cultures that emphasize early maturity, family responsibility, collective well-being, these same individuals find themselves aligned with societal values. A 30-year-old supporting extended family members is celebrated in collectivist cultures, but might feel prematurely aged in individualistic societies where peers are finding themselves through travel and self-exploration. Social psychologists argue that cultural scripts around age and responsibility shape subjective age perception more than most people realize. The same internal experience of maturity can feel either validating or isolating, depending entirely on cultural context. This raises the question that leads somewhere unexpected. Health psychology has uncovered something that blurs the line between mental perception and physical reality. People who perceive themselves as older don't just think differently, they start behaving in ways that create measurable physical changes. Studies show these individuals adopt more cautious behaviors, reduce risk-taking, prioritize rest over social engagement. They move through the world like someone decades older, and gradually, the body begins to match the mind's expectations. Chronic fatigue appears, energy levels decline, physical resilience decreases. It's a feedback loop. Feeling older leads to acting older, which creates physical sensations of aging, which reinforces the perception of being older. The mind and body aren't separate systems having independent experiences. They're continuously influencing each other in ways that compound over time. But there's another layer to this that ventures into existential territory. People who feel older think about death more frequently. Not morbidly, but consciously. They had what psychologists call heightened temporal perspective, an acute awareness of time.